Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now at midsummer, the roses are really kicking in. It's actually been slow to happen this year. They've steadily unfurled rather than being a great burst of rosy colour. But that's good, because it means that although they're slow to come, they'll be slow to go and they'll last longer. And most of the roses here in the cottage garden are old or classic roses. For example, this one is Rosa Gallica officinalis, the apothecary's rose. And it's one of the oldest roses known to man and still one of the loveliest. And if I keep deadheading it, just taking off the spent flowers, going right back down to a bud or a leaf, that will promote more flowering. Now the white rose on the corner here is a modern rose. It's called Desdemona. And if I deadhead that regularly, it should go on flowering into autumn. Now, coming up on today's programme, Adam meets the head gardener at one of the country's premier football clubs.
So this beetroot leaf is mixed with this rocket here into a shot.
Wow. And the players will have that maybe before a game, training, afterwards? What?
Before and after.
Love the fact that top-end Tottenham players are having a shot of beetroot and rocket. That's
Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now at midsummer, the roses are really kicking in. It's actually been slow to happen this year. They've steadily unfurled rather than being a great burst of rosy colour. But that's good, because it means that although they're slow to come, they'll be slow to go and they'll last longer. And most of the roses here in the cottage garden are old or classic roses. For example, this one is Rosa Gallica officinalis, the apothecary's rose. And it's one of the oldest roses known to man and still one of the loveliest. And if I keep deadheading it, just taking off the spent flowers, going right back down to a bud or a leaf, that will promote more flowering. Now the white rose on the corner here is a modern rose. It's called Desdemona. And if I deadhead that regularly, it should go on flowering into autumn. Now, coming up on today's programme, Adam meets the head gardener at one of the country's premier football clubs.
So this beetroot leaf is mixed with this rocket here into a shot.
wow. And the players will have that maybe before a game, training, afterwards? What?
Before and after.
Love the fact that top-end Tottenham players are having a shot of beetroot and rocket. That's fantastic.
We meet a gardener whose vocation is to get out in her garden every single day, no matter what the weather or the season.
Gardening makes me feel happy. And I think that sums it up, really. And I think without it, I'd be lost.
Carol visits Ordnance House near Salisbury with a heady mix of marvellous planting and formal evergreen structure.
I'm just so excited. This garden just draws you in. You don't know where to start. And the planting, it's marvellous.
And I shall be planting out my squashes and pumpkins. I'm clutching these sunflowers because they are part of the seasonal shift where the planting completely changes right across the garden actually, but particularly affects here in the Jewel Garden. Because up until midsummer, which is where we are now, the days are getting longer, so therefore there is more and more light. So there's a whole batch of plants that have evolved to respond to heat. And of course now, with any luck, the days are getting warmer, and critically the night's getting warmer too. So plants like these sunflowers and a whole batch of tender annuals are perfect for planting into your borders to replace that spring and early summer display. So I have rich colours from the sunflowers. And by the way, sunflowers don't need to be just yellow. These are Velvet Queen, which are a lovely sort of burnt orange colour. I've got Claret, which is ruby. I've even got a very pale yellow, Vanilla Ice, which I shall put into the cottage garden. So that has a good root system. I confess this has been in the pot probably a little bit too long. It's not root bound, but certainly it's very dry and has exhausted all the nutrition it's going to get from this.
The planting itself is easy enough. Let's put that in. These will start flowering in about 2 weeks' time.
Right, that's a little group of sunflowers, and I will repeat this in a dozen other places in the Jewel Garden. But having got these in, now I've got more that I want to get in next to them and to work and coordinate with them. Now what I have here, a Tithonia, Mexican sunflower, and there's no other plant that gives you such an intense orange. In our soil, they will grow 5 and even 6 foot tall. We grow all our tender annuals from seed, and by and large, that's a brilliant way to do it. It certainly saves a lot of money. It means we can have real quantity.
So that goes in there like that.
I've got a little bit more room in there. Now I've got a choice. I've got here some Cerinthe and I've got some Cosmos. I love Cosmos. This is Cosmos Antiquity, and I love the intensity of that colour with the yellow boss in the middle. It will fade a bit. Most Cosmos flowers do, but by deadheading them, that will keep on flowering for months. But the critical thing about all these tender annuals is they will give intense colour from a couple of weeks' time right through into autumn. And that binds the garden together. Now, Adam has been to North London to visit one of our great football clubs, but not for the reason that you might expect.
I love growing vegetables. I adore football. Do you imagine putting the two together? For me, that is a near perfect day. Would you believe I'm at Tottenham Hotspur's football club training ground in Enfield in their kitchen garden? Premier League footballers need to be strict about their diet and require a constant supply of fresh fruit and vegetables to keep them in top condition. Off the pitch, supporting the team is Kuda Chimbudzi, who came to the UK about 20 years ago as a refugee from Zimbabwe. Since then, he has trained in horticulture and started working here in 2018.
I've always been a kitchen gardener. This has been my passion. I felt like I can use ornamental energies to actually make edible plants look good.
Yeah,
that was my inspiration. It was a dream come true to come and work in something that I really like to do. We've got 65 beds. It's an A to Z of veg.
Yeah.
From asparagus to zucchini, right?
I like that. Yeah.
So we've got all kind of alliums, we've got beans, we've got chard. The sun rises from there.
Yeah.
And it goes that way.
Yep.
So with my limited, photo period in winter and spring, these are the ideal beds for me. So I work with them during the winter and spring.
And then, so you've got the fruits in the middle, and then the other end.
Yes, the other end, I've got the seasonal, warm, loving. So we've got the sweet corn, the courgettes, we've got carrots down there, some pak choy, some brassicas, and then we've got a big pumpkin patch that we have at the end of the kitchen garden.
This is really clever, but it's also cool. So whose idea was it to have a veg garden here?
That was the chairman's idea, Mr. Levy.
So it's Daniel Levy's idea?
Yes, it was set up based on sustainability, ecology, and nutrition. To encourage the youths to come around and have a walk and see things that inspire them. It could be bugs, it could be flowers, it could be, different things.
Kuda feeds around 80 people a day. That includes players, ground people and office staff. So he needs to pack veg into every space available.
I've got probably 40 to 45 runner beans in a space of 2 meters.
Yeah.
So that'll give me approximately 20 kilograms. you know.
And what's great is, you know, for somebody at home, that could be against the fence, couldn't it?
Yes.
You know,
could
up
be
the
against
side
the
of the
fence.
garage. Lots of people think about sport and you instantly think about, oh, pack yourself out with carbs or
Yes.
pack yourself out with protein.
Yes.
Well, actually, in reality, there's an awful lot of other stuff that
Yes.
our veggies bring us that we
Yes.
desperately need.
Yes, in terms of immunity boosting,
Yeah.
bone strength and regenerative processes
Yeah.
that goes on within the body.
Yeah.
It's the veggies and the herbs that have got that power. So this beetroot leaf is mixed with this rocket here, and
Wow.
into a shot. So basically, just juicing this and that together, and you get a reddish, greenish
Wow.
texture
And the players will have that maybe before a game, training, afterwards? What?
before and after.
Love the fact that top-end Tottenham players are having a shot of beetroot and rocket. That's fantastic.
Growing in Zimbabwe, everybody's got little pieces of land. My uncle is a grower. He
Yeah.
used to grow bananas, all kind of fruits.
Yeah.
It was what we call subsistence farmers.
Yeah.
You know? So I learned a lot from him. So down there, I've got the African kale called Chomolia.
Tremolia.
Yes.
Is you a little bit shorter than
No,
I am?
I've got a lower center of gravity.
Oh, is that what? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't say
You're right.
short.
I'd be smashing my head in there.
So basically, cuttings,
Yeah.
right? So you just remove as many leaves as you can.
No cutting under a node, anything
Nothing.
like that, and away it goes.
All it needs is just good anchorage. And this one grows to 1 meter, 1.5,
Wow.
going up and
Yeah.
sideways. So it becomes
Yeah.
a bush if you leave it.
For you, this is a good crop for, you know, for the football club because
Yes.
it keeps going, but
Yes.
also it's there in those busy months as
Yes.
well, isn't it? The busiest time in the football season is the winter period,
Yes.
but actually, which is ultimately slightly quieter in the old veg garden. You know.
Yes,
So
yes.
how do you deal with that?
When it gets to get too cold, we go into the greenhouse. We need a constant supply of our cresses, our leafy greens. And I know that if I maximize and containerize in the greenhouse, I can still sustain supplying that during the winter. I got maybe 5 centimeters clean, the horticultural sand. So it's just sowing continuously, you know?
Because you've literally got these lines of press, haven't you?
Yes.
All the way along.
That's for next week, you know? When that one is finished, I can then go that side and then have a continuous
And just keep-
supply, you know, because cresses are very nutritious.
So soil, what do you do to the soil every year?
We put organic matter, so it's a mix of mushroom compost
Yeah.
and garden waste.
Right.
There's a therapeutic feeling that you get from growing veg. You know, you're seeing the results of your hard work, you know.
When they say the pumpkin soup was extra special this year, there'll be a reason.
Yes.
It's a lovely place to come grow stuff, but in an incredibly sporting environment.
It's competitive, you know. You
Yeah.
have to compete with yourself. It's a results-based industry, just like football. So it's a beautiful struggle, but it's a joy to see people loving it.
What Kuda's done here is a little bit mind-blowing. Even with an area this big, he's not wasted any space. Here, he's used the leaf beet more or less as ground cover. He'll cut those as youngsters and they'll compete with the weeds. But I also love the way that he's worked around the edge of his beds, adding the height. I hadn't thought of that before. He's put the beans over here. He's put the peas using the netting. But of course, inside, you're creating this wonderful little sheltered space. Do you know, I'm pleased I've come because those ideas are coming home.
I have to say, I think it's really enlightened of Tottenham to be so holistic about the fitness and health of their players. Well, I'm planting now my squashes and pumpkins. And in the past, I've grown these up supports, either wigwams or created as trellis. But they need to be really strong because these can be quite heavy. And to be honest, I don't have the sticks and supports that I used to have to hand. So this year, I'm going to plant them flat on the ground. Now you can see I've marked out the spacing. And what I would say is don't be tempted to put them any closer together than this. 1 metre in any direction is the closest you should plant. And if you've got more space, 2 metres is not absurd. Squashes and pumpkins are the greediest and thirstiest plants that you could possibly grow. The more you feed them, the better they will be. And the best thing you can do to give them a start in life is some compost. And not only will that feed, but it will act as a sponge to hold moisture. So we'll just cover that up like that and then plant into it. Now the first variety I'm going to plant is Marina de Chioggia. This is one of my favourite pumpkins because it's so beautiful. It's a lovely greeny blue, absolutely delicious. And then, having prepared the ground, I just pop that in like that. Make a slight circle around it so that when I water it, the water doesn't run off away from it. This is another old favourite. This is Turk's Turban. So cool because it's a sort of double bun. I always grow this because it's so decorative. It's very good to eat too. So we'll put that in like that. I'm also adding a variety called Yuchiki Kuri, which is an onion-shaped Japanese squash, which tastes fabulous. Now, the reason why I'm raking this is not just for neatness, but because I haven't finished. What we have is masses of bare soil, which will be covered. But until then, it's a waste of space not to use it. Now, in the past, I've grown lettuce with pumpkins, any kind of catch crop that will grow quickly, you'll harvest and eat while there is still light available. But this year, I'm going to grow my sweet corn with them. And with sweet corn, you must plant them in a grid, not in rows, because they are wind pollinated. So the wind blows the pollen, and if you plant them in a row and the wind comes from the side, it'll just simply blow them away. But if you have them in the grid, it doesn't matter which direction the wind comes from, there's a very high chance that they'll be pollinated. And so if we plant them at a spacing sort of like that, and they go down here. Now, I must stress how important it is to water these. When I finish planting, I will water these in, give them a really good soak. Now, the secret to this really is managing your space well, just working out how they're going to grow. But for our first visit to one of your gardens this week, which takes us to Wales, we visited a garden where they don't have that luxury. They've really got a tiny space, but it's used brilliantly.
Hello, I'm Laura Cameron and I'd like to show you around my garden in beautiful Carnarvon in northwest Wales. So it's a container garden full of pretty plants and pots just to make use of this long concrete strip along the front of the house. Like a lot of people, I suddenly got into gardening during the first lockdown. Before, I liked plants but I wasn't interested in doing anything myself. And for years we just had one fuchsia bush in the front garden, that was the only thing. So I bought about 5 pots and that went well. So this year when we got to May, I went a bit mad and bought lots of pots and beautiful plants from the local garden centre, and friends gave me cuttings. This has gone amazingly well, this fuchsia, it's beautiful. And I love geraniums, my granddad was really into geraniums, so I've always had a real fondness for them, and lavenders. And I've discovered nemesias, and they've all got cute names like Easter bonnet or plums and custard. Maybe the plant I most wanted was a blue hydrangea. I had serious hydrangea envy whenever I walked past other people's gardens. So I bought myself one 2 or 3 months ago, and it is very blue, it's growing really well, and I love it. just trying to make everything about the house a little more pleasing to the eye, so when people walk past, we're on a busy corner, that it maybe lifts the spirits and makes them smile, because I know I enjoy that when I walk past other people's houses. But at the moment, I just love coming out here with the cat quite often. I love coming out and seeing what's new in this little tiny patch of mine. Hey, thank you for taking the little trip around my garden. I hope you enjoyed watching. Bye!
Come on, Liz. What I really like about your garden, Laura, is that it's clearly giving you a lot of pleasure. But more than that, you're giving pleasure to every single passerby. There's a generosity about it that I love. The garden here is still full of foxgloves, and they are really the last of the biennials that flower, certainly in this garden. Now, biennials are those plants that set seed, grow, and develop roots and foliage, but no flowers in their first growing season. They then overwinter and start to grow again as soon as the days get longer in late February and early March, and then produce their flowers in spring and early summer, like foxgloves. And you have sweet rocket, you have wallflowers, you have forget-me-nots. These are all classic biennials. And now is the time to sow them, to develop those strong roots and nice leaf system that can go into winter ready for flowering next year. Now, I've got some wallflowers and some lovely white foxgloves there and some sweet rocket, but I'm going to sow the wallflowers first. And wallflowers are a brassica. They are a relative of cabbages and cauliflowers, and by and large, brassicas seem to do better if they can have as much connection to the soil as possible. In other words, not compost. If you sow them normally in a seed tray and prick them out and put them on, they never do quite as well as those ones that seed themselves naturally. And the way I get around that is by adding some soil from the garden to my compost. All I do is just get a handful or two like that and just add it to this peat-free compost mix. In fact, it's a coir-based compost. Mix it in a little bit. And what it means is, once the seeds germinate, from day one, they are making that connection with the soil. And then I will actually, instead of pricking them out into pots, I'll prick them out into the garden, in a row in the veg garden, and try to get strong, healthy plants via the soil. So, get a seed tray. Like that. Give it a shake to level it down, get rid of the lumps. Now, I've got three types here. I've got Fire King, which is a wonderful sort of orange burning gold, as the name suggests. There's Vulcan, which is a strong red. And then there's Orange Bedder. And the Bedder series, you can get Orange Bedder, Primrose Bedder. They're really reliable, pure colours. I use those quite a lot, and this is what I'm going to sow. Now, wallflowers tend to have a lot of seeds in a packet. This is why I'm using a bigger seed tray. And where you have a lot of seeds, don't be tempted to sow them thickly. Just very thinly sprinkle them on here. There we go. That's fine. So we'll put them back in there. And I can do another sowing later. Firm it down like that, just to make sure that the seed is really making a good contact. And then I'll just sprinkle a little bit of compost over the top. Right, a label. Whoa, come on, there we go. I will give this a good soak and pop it in the greenhouse. In fact, it doesn't need to go in the greenhouse. This will germinate perfectly well outside. Just put it somewhere vaguely sheltered. Make sure it doesn't dry out. It'll germinate in about a week or two, and let the seedlings grow on till they're large enough to handle. Prick them out into plugs, and then, when they're an inch or two tall, I will plant these out into the soil. They can then be moved to their final position in a pot or in the bed in October or even early next spring. Now, last September, we went to visit the garden of Eileen Spencer in Leicester. And she's been making it for the last 38 years, but it is still consuming all her time, energy, and passion.
high maintenance garden means that you've got to come out into the garden every day, no matter what the weather. I enjoy doing that because it gives me the sense of control, but it is hard work. I do sit in it occasionally, but I don't sit down for very long because I have to get up and do something to it. My garden's 38 years old, and this is what it actually looked like. Not much in it. The only thing that remains of the original garden is this apple tree. I've done all the work myself. My first thought was, I want flowers, and I want colour, and I want them to be immediately outside my back door. This is my 90-foot herbaceous border, and I planted it up as a rainbow. I've let it mingle a bit because it looks a lot more natural. So this is the blue bit. This year I decided that I was going to plant my cornflowers in plugs so that I could get them going and put them where I wanted. And normally they don't last very long, so I decided that this year I was going to deadhead them to see if I could try and prolong the flowering, and it seems to have worked because they're still in flower now, and they started about the beginning of May, so that's a thing that I'll do again another day. So this area here then goes into the oranges and yellows. And this is my red bit here. And then we have down to the purple-leaved cotinus, which has got a Clematis durandii growing through it. But I have actually got just over 100 clematis in the garden. Every shrub and tree has a clematis in it, so it doubles the interest season. My white border, and the clematis growing over there is Viticella alba luxurians. And it's unusual because at the edge of each petal there's little green spots. It's very vigorous, and each year you can cut it down to about 12 inches high and it will flower off this season's growth. And it's very useful for covering structures quickly. A garden is personal, and some people like minimal planting. That's not for me. And I'm afraid, I hate to say this, but I hate grasses. I've got two somewhere. I know they're modern and some people like them, but I don't think, to be honest, they'd fit in with mine. Well, this part of the garden was once open, and I decided that I needed to screen off my vegetable patch from the rest of the garden. So I put in this plant screen, which came as a flat pack. I did it in the winter time when I was bored. Then I planted the roses that spring and underplanted it with clematis. And then I decided that perhaps we needed a little bit more colour, and I planted the lovely lavenders in front. And now the lawn diminished and the plants increased. I got into gardening because of my grandfather. He'd got a passion for orchids and grew lots of them in the greenhouse, and he'd make me learn the names of them, which was a little hard for a 4-year-old. And I took my first cutting, and when it rooted, I can remember this feeling of wonder that this little bit of a plant had actually grown roots, and I think that possibly got me hooked. We had a bit of a downpour last night, and it's made rather a mess of the roses. So a little tip that I have, if I come in and just give it a gentle shake, get rid of the loose petals, It helps to perk them up and makes them look a little bit more presentable. I've got several Hemeracales in my garden, otherwise known as daylilies, and as the name suggests, the flowers only last a day, which means daily deadheading. But instead of taking them off straight away, I usually wait until they've dried off a bit. If I do it too early and they're still a bit moist, it damages the stem. Hemerocallis, I call them daylilies. I can never be bored because there's always something that needs doing in the garden. And I think without it, I'd be lost. Gardening makes me feel happy and relaxed. I think that sums it up, really.
Well, I like Eileen's style. I like the so-called high-maintenance gardens. There was a vogue for low maintenance, but I always felt that that was sort of anti-gardening. If you love gardening, and so many of us do, then why would you want to have less of it? Gardening itself, whether it's weeding or just deadheading, is part of the enjoyment. And so I think gardens like hers are perfect. And like her, whenever I sit down with a cup of tea, I always see something to do. Now, I've got myself a little bit of high maintenance work here with growing perennials from seed. If you remember, I sowed delphiniums and Rudbeckias back in early April and asked if you wanted to try and sow them along too, because sowing perennials and growing them on is a great way to get volume and to bulk up for very, very little money. But it does take a little bit of work. Now, we've got really good stock of Rudbeckias here. My delphiniums, this is sky blue, didn't germinate so well, and I've only got here 6 plants. They're not looking that happy, but they'll be okay. And now I'm going to pop them on. Take them out the plug carefully. So there we have a fairly good root system on that. You can see that's fine. The plants look a little bit sad, but they'll come on. There's nothing to worry about. I'm now going to pop this on so it's got plenty of nutrition and space to grow, get a strong root system. That now will grow on, and I would expect it to treble its size by the end of summer. I don't need to plant it out in autumn, although I could do. This will keep perfectly well in a sheltered place over winter, ready to flower next summer. It's not going to do it this year. Now with the Rudbeckia, they are much stronger plants. You can see that that's growing quite vigorously, more roots, and if I had open ground, I would plant this out as it is. But I won't plant them into the hurly-burly of the border because there's just too much competition for light and nutrition. I want a bigger plant to put in that. So I'll put these on too. Same compost. And that can be watered and grown on and then planted out probably in about 8 weeks' time. Now I will have to pot on all of these, and there's some work involved in that, but I enjoy doing it. And the great thing about all this is the liberation, the creative liberation it gives by having volume, as well as saving money. Now, still to come on today's programme. Carol visits the garden of Ordnance House near Salisbury, with its mixture of marvellous planting and formal evergreen structure.
Everywhere you look, each space is defined by all sorts of evergreens, and all this geometry, all this symmetry is used to frame the most exuberant planting you ever saw.
I've had this greenhouse for about 10 years now. And initially, I grew tomatoes and chilies and aubergines in here, and they did really well. And then gradually, the performance dropped off, and I couldn't work out what was going on. But then I realised that the vine, which was planted 10 years ago, has gradually got bigger and bigger, and it's shading the greenhouse quite heavily in summer. And plants like tomatoes and chilies want as much sunshine as possible. Now, in winter, the leaves fall. You get all the winter sunlight, it's protected, and it's really good for storing the succulents. And I have this bench covered in all the succulents. They're very happy, and that works well. It's in summer. I really need to find a different solution. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a display, a summer display in here, of tender fuchsias and pelargoniums. Now, ignore these fuchsias because these are just the ones I've got. Most of them are hardy. They'll go outside and I will be building a new collection. But I've kept them in to show you the colours because that's really the colour theme that I'm after. And the ideal pelargonium for this warm, slightly shady environment are the regal pelargoniums. Like this one, which is Voodoo, has amazing rich cherry pink touch with burgundy. And then an even darker colour, this is Chocolate. And I want to pot all these into terracotta pots because pelargoniums do much better in terracotta than plastic because terracotta is slightly porous and it means the risk of being waterlogged is much reduced, and that's what pelargoniums hate. We need a crock to make sure that the drainage hole doesn't get blocked by compost. I've mixed up some extra grit into my peat-free compost. That will give the extra drainage that pelargoniums really like. If we take this out of here, pop that in there like that. You do need to give these a good soak once a week. And if you feed them at the same time with some liquid seaweed or comfrey feed, they will flower all the better for that. Now these are regal pelargoniums and have slightly special conditions because they like the light shade. But of course you've got angel pelargoniums, you've got scented leaf pelargoniums, you've got zonal pelargoniums, all of which do very well in full sun outside in English summer. And they're very reasonably priced. These are not expensive plants. So for example, I've got a tray here of zonal pelargoniums, called zonal because you have this chocolate zone on the leaves. Ideal for a window box or on a patio, a windowsill even. But for this display that I want to build up, the regal pelargoniums are absolutely ideal. And then, and this is the key point of my cunning plan, is when it's time to bring the succulents back in, I can cut back both the pelargoniums and the fuchsias. They can be stored underneath the bench or in a shed, and they can be completely dormant over winter. And then when the succulents come out, which is sort of April time, the fuchsias and the pelargoniums can be brought out, watered, and they can begin their display. Now, it's time to have another look at one of your films, and we're going to Northern Ireland, where we get some good tips on how best to look after houseplants.
Hi Gardener's World, my name is Philip. Welcome to Yew Cottage Garden. I am located in Northern Ireland, and today I would like to share with you my tip for indoor houseplants. As you can possibly tell, I have recorded this outdoors. This has been the first mildest day since winter that I was able to bring all my indoor houseplants outside, and the reason for doing so is it gives rain for the rest of the day. I will bring the houseplants indoors later on this evening, but whilst they're outdoors they will get misted for free from the rain and they'll be in the natural elements. Indoor houseplants need misted because generally they're around central heating, and this dries the leaves out and sort of makes the plants fatigued. So it's a good tip throughout summer until autumn or until the frosts start again. If you know that the weather is to be relatively mild and it's going to be a rainy day, take advantage of that. Bring your houseplants outside and let them get all the natural elements from the rain. Natural rainwater is more effective and more healthy for your plants than going to the tap. This is also more water sustainable, and you would be surprised how lush and vigorous your plants will get after a day outside in the rain. Some houseplants, like this devil ivy, are extremely easy to propagate. Gradually as the stem grows on, it forms these nodules in between the leaves, and I cut them off and insert them into a bowl of water, like this one I done earlier. There's potentially 10 new baby devil leaf ivy plants within this jar, and what I'll do is change the water on a weekly rotation, and gradually over time these cuttings will develop roots, and from that I can pot them on, and then I can have more baby devil leaf ivies. I really hope that that tip was helpful. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Thanks for the tip about the rain, Philip, but I just wish we had some rain to put the houseplants in. It has been very dry indeed here. Now, this is the mound, and it's evolved over the last few years, but it's almost there. I'm almost happy with it. At the top, we've now got the summer house and 2 new beds. There's a west-facing one, which we planted last year, and an east-facing one. And this feels like a sunny, good place to be. On this level, the colour scheme is working well. The pale lemon yellows and the pale blues, exactly what I want. So that's fine. But it's the lower level, these sloping beds that I began last summer, which really need work. And they were great in spring. I was very pleased with the way that the bulbs looked, and that was fine. But that's over. And having been cleared away, what we're left with is just not enough. Clearly, this is not how I want them to be. And I'm going to use as my guide the beds above, the same colours, the same feel, but add plants and just build it up over the course of the year so it's looking how I want it to be. Now, I'm starting with an agapanthus, and I'm going to put this at the top of the slope because one of the key things, one of the reasons I made these beds was because they slope. That gives me drainage. And drainage is the thing that's hardest to come by here at Longmeadow. I've got agapanthus in pots, but I want to try growing them in the soil. Now that's for the top of the slope, which is the sunniest part. And to be honest, I made this at the end of summer, thinking it would be probably a bit sunnier than it is now. And of course the trees are blocking it, so it's slightly shady, but I've catered for that because what I have here is a wonderful plant. This is Corydalis porcelain blue. I've got one other which I'll put on the other side, and this will grow in some shade, so we'll put this lower down. This will add that blue that is so precious, and blue of course is the rarest colour in nature. So blue and yellow, that's the theme we want, and also the lovely foliage, that glaucous foliage, which we don't really have in this border yet, but I will work on and add. Okay, I'm going to start planting. Now the agapanthus is the first, and by and large you're much better planting herbaceous agapanthus into the ground because they're hardier. The evergreen agapanthus are better off stored in a frost-free place over winter. And it's a little bit of an urban myth that they need to have their roots constricted, although in a pot with less room they do flower very well. And if you have one that's got lots of foliage, very healthy, but either very few or no flowers, it probably is a good idea to lift it and put it into a pot or move it somewhere where the roots have less of a rich, free run for them. We'll try this out. We'll see how it goes. There we go. This is a variety called Blue, very simply. And we'll pop that in there. Okay, there we are. Now, very different is the Corydalis. And if I put it here, pop that in like that, and that can spill slightly down the hill, and this lovely ferny texture to the foliage. And this will start flowering sort of mid-spring, around about April time. Really good for bridging that gap between spring and summer. Well, that's a start. This is by no means a finish, and I will continue taking stock, adding, and as I say, maybe even subtracting over the course of the coming months. And the great thing about creating a border is that process of evolution is the fun of it. It's not about failure, it's about learning and changing and adapting, and I love it. Now, for our last visit to one of your gardens, we're going to Nottingham, and we have one of our younger viewers with a really good tip.
I'm Autumn, I'm 11 from Beeson Rylands, and I'm going to show you how to make these plant pots. All you'll need is 1/3 of a page of a newspaper, so just normal newspaper, and then you want to fold down the top of it, like this. Then grab a little glass jar, in the side we just folded, put that to the pot. Then the side where it overhangs, you want to fold down at the bottom of the pot, like this. Then the other side. Then the other two. Then you want a little bit of masking tape, stick it on the side.
Thanks, Autumn. That is a really useful tip and a great way of saving money. Now, it's time to harvest gooseberries, and it's never a fixed date because obviously it depends on the season, the weather, the particular type of gooseberry you're growing. But I'm very mindful that the time is critical because last year we had a good crop of gooseberries, went up to collect them one evening and there wasn't a single one left. The birds had taken the lot. Blackbirds love gooseberries and will strip them overnight. Now, obviously you can net them if that's feasible, and that will help. But it's quite tricky to net this area here. So what I've been doing is keeping an eye on them. And if your gooseberries like mine, plants are really healthy and they look at all ready to harvest, then do it. Do it now. Now you can tell if a gooseberry is fully ripe because when you get hold of it, it comes away in your hand. Now that's come away in my hand now. Although it's still quite firm, the sugars be well developed. However, if you have to cut them off, that's fine. All it means is they'll be a little bit tartar, a little bit more sour. And if you enjoy that taste, and by and large I do, that's great. If not, you just add a little bit more sugar. And let's be clear about this. Gooseberries are heavenly. I'm growing these as cordons. Now, gooseberries respond very well to growing as cordons because you get an awful lot of fruit in ratio to the plant in a very, very limited space. And you can do it against a trellis, you can do it against a wall, or freestanding like this. The advantage of freestanding is you get plenty of airflow, and that stops mould and to a certain extent sawflies, which are the two big problems with gooseberries. But the key thing about them is they are tough plants. So treat them tough, don't feed them too much, and then harvest them when they're ready. Well, at least the blackbirds won't get them all. And in fact, I'm going to come back and I'm going to go on picking and we can freeze them and enjoy every last berry. Now, it's time to join Carol. She visits a garden in Salisbury which combines really stylish structure with some superb planting.
I love an early summer garden. They make my heart sing. But occasionally one really stands out. I'm just so excited. This garden just draws you in, it pulls you into its centre. Every vista is just so beautiful, you don't know where to start. And the planting, it's marvellous. I'm going this way first. This is Ordnance House near Salisbury. It started as a blank lawn just over 10 years ago. And now there's a series of glorious areas, all cleverly intertwined. The very first thing you notice in this garden is the structure everywhere. First of all, there are two huge beech trees either end of the garden, but the owners have capitalised on that whole idea of greenery. And everywhere you look, each space is defined by all sorts of evergreens and then beech hedges too. But although the plant range is limited, they're used in so many different ways. There are little box hedges, yes, but the most outstanding thing to my mind is the use of this Portuguese laurel. Not only is it in a traditional hedge across here, but then there are these great lollipops. They create this corner of calm, clean structure, while more ground-level globes flow up the bank behind. the beds and borders here, there's a huge diversity of plants. All kind of things mix and mingle with one another. But occasionally, that palette of plants is much more limited, as in this lovely walkway through to the seat. At the moment, there are just 2 or 3 plants which you notice immediately. And the fact that they're used over and over again makes this lovely sort of rhythm right the way through. Here, a Dutch iris called Eye of the Tiger. That's a bulbous plant. Plant it in September or so. And if you've got soil like the soil here, which is really well drained, really sunny, then it should come up year after year after year. And it's paired here with a white version of valerian. This, with these white and green buds, contrasted with that dark, dramatic iris, is just such a beautiful contrast. And since this was introduced by the Romans, I should give it its Latin name. It's Centranthus ruber albus, the white form of this valerian. Once they've finished, then other plants are going to take over. There's lavender right the way down through here, Astrantia stachys with lovely silvery leaves. But as that lavender comes out, so this clematis is going to fill in overhead. It's Clematis viticella purpurea planer elegans, which is a mouthful, but so worth it. And this whole picture will be totally different. Well, an equally simple and yet totally inspired planting is this long walkway. It's composed of just 2 plants, a Nepeta, this is Walker's Low, a lovely catmint, and with it, in perfect contrast, right across the other side of the colour wheel from this, is this Sisyrinchium with these creamy yellow flowers and these very straight stems. Now, you might think, looking along here, how on earth would I possibly be able to afford to do such a thing in my garden? But it's all been done from scratch. The owner started off with just a couple of plants of the Nepeta, and it's the simplest thing in the world to take from cuttings. Just any little basal growths, short lengths, put around the side of a pot of gritty compost, and you can increase your stock exponentially. Lots of this luscious planting was grown from cuttings or division, and they collect their seeds. These foxgloves are all homegrown. There are standalone touches too, like this pyracantha, beautifully brightening up the garage. It's rare to find, but this garden is a perfect combination of structure and plantiness. This pleached hornbeam frames the view of the ornamental garden beyond. And look, the shape of those alliums is reflected in the lollipop trees. Beyond that, those beautiful hedges, and beyond that, the landscape outside and the sky above. It's utterly perfect.
Well, like Carol, I love the repetition and the scale of the planting in the garden, both structurally and with plants. Now my container veg plot is doing fine. I'm perfectly happy with it. Ready to start harvesting the lettuce, they certainly need that, and the chard. The more you cut back chard, the more it will regrow, so that certainly wants to be cut back. Well, the one thing I would say, if you're growing vegetables in containers, now we're going into summer, just water. Water every day if it's hot and dry, and you need to water twice as much as anything grown in the soil. Now my potatoes are growing well. They haven't flowered yet, which means that they're certainly not ready to harvest. And what I'm doing is just earthing them up a little bit. And that means just adding a layer of compost to them. There are two reasons for this. One is to stop them flopping. If we get very heavy rainfall, they can be bashed down. And two, and this is the most important reason, is to add a protective layer so the emerging tubers are not exposed to light, because if they are, they'll turn green and that's poisonous. Earlier in the season, of course, you earth up to protect them from frost, but hopefully we are past any risk of frost at all. Right, while I'm doing this, here's some jobs for you this weekend. If you grow apples or pears, you may notice something called the June drop, when the tree will shed excess fruit. There's nothing wrong with this. In fact, you should help it on the way. Pick off all the smallest fruits, leaving no more than 2 decent-sized ones in any group. And that means that they will grow bigger and healthier as a result. Sweet peas are still flowering, but from midsummer onwards, they are urgently trying to develop seeds as the days shorten. You can delay this process by picking them regularly, and we found that if you pick them every week, taking as many flowers as possible each time, that extends the flowering season right through till late summer. Most bearded irises will have finished flowering by now, but don't let them form seed, because this will take energy away from the rhizome, which is where next year's flowers are being formed. So snap off the seed heads and then let the stem and the foliage die back slowly to feed into that rhizome. The Paradise Garden is now 4 years old from inception, and I think it's found itself. It's a strange thing. When you conceive of an area of a garden or an entire garden, you have a clear idea of what you want and you lay it out. But actually the garden has to find what it wants. And hopefully you meet in the middle and both parties can be satisfied. And it's taken a few years, but I think we're getting there now. We've enlarged this central square and lowered the water, and that gives a better feeling of space, but also the plants, the touches of colour, the intensity of the roses and the touches from the cornflowers, and we've still got some irises going. And that dotting, the intention being like a Persian carpet, is working, I think. I always enjoy coming here now. And actually this is the one part of the garden where I do come and sit occasionally. Not for long, but I sit and I listen to the water, and it's very peaceful. But that's it for today, and we will be back here at Longmeadow next Friday at the earlier time of 7:30. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.